You're watching a lesson on working with organizational units, or what's sometimes just referred to as the letters OU for short. I mean, because let's be real, organizational unit, that's a mouthful. Okay, so here we are over on our domain controller, NYDC1. And we need to jump into Active Directory, users and computers. So let's do that now. Here in Active Directory, users and computers, the first thing I want to point out is, again, remembering that OUs are containers, right? Organizational units are containers. But they're not the only type of container. All right? Right here at the top, we have globalmantics.local. That is the top level container. So a domain is sometimes considered a top level container. Inside there, we have our, well, if the domain is the top level, we'll say first level containers. And you'll notice that a lot of these even say container, container, container. The domain controller's OU, right? Domain controller's container is called an organizational unit. You can tell because it has this little icon on it as opposed to the regular non-OU built-in default containers. So what I want to do here is I want to show you how to create your own organizational units, create your own container objects. So I'm going to go right up to the very top. I'm going to go to globalmantics.local and right-click, select New, and Organizational Unit. Then from there, you just simply give it a name. And typically, your first level containers or your top level containers within the domain, you want them to be something that is fairly static. Okay, there's a lot of different options we have here when organizing a structure here. We could start off with something like locations, right? If our company's in different locations, or we might go with different departments. We could create our own containers that just say users, that's separate than the built-in users container, and computers that's separate than the computers container. There's a lot of different options, but you want to go with something that's fairly static. And the recommendation that I make is that you go with locations, because locations typically don't change. For instance, Globalmantics is headquartered in New York. Now, are they always going to be headquartered in New York? Not necessarily, but is that going to change very often? No. Okay, if it's going to move, it's going to be something fairly significant, and it might only happen once in the company's lifetime. Okay, so I think locations are a great top-level organizational unit, even if you're a smaller company. Okay, let's say we weren't the worldwide Globalmantics. Let's say we were just some small organization and we only existed in one location. It's still not a bad idea to put that location first and then build your departments within that. And the reason why is because departments change all the time. I mean, I've seen a department called sales on a whim get split apart into two different departments, one called sales, one called marketing. Right? Maybe before it was sales and marketing, which is one department. Now we have two departments, sales and then a separate one, marketing. So I don't like doing departments first. Now when it comes to location, another thing you might want to keep in mind is, do you want to go with a city or a state or a country or maybe even a continent? Okay, so again, I'm going to do New York here. Let me go ahead and type that in, New York, because that's where Globalmantics headquarters is. But the reality is I might want to start with a top level that says North America. And then inside North America, I might create the New York office. And that might not be a bad idea here for Globalmantics. And the reason why is, well, we actually have two locations in North America. Globalmantics has a New York office, but also has a Dallas office. So it's up to you where you want that structure to be. I'm going to choose just to do New York. Now, there's a checkbox right here that says protect container from accidental deletion. And it is just what it sounds like. When this box is checked, you can't accidentally delete the container. You would have to go out of your way to clearly give the approval to delete this container. And I'll show you that in just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to leave that checked and I'm going to click OK. And you'll see here I now have an organizational unit called New York. Now, if I want to move some of my stuff to New York, So for instance, if I click here on the users container and we have our Jane Doe and John Smith, who will say both work in the New York office, I can highlight them both and just drag them over to the New York container. Now we've seen that in another lesson where you can just move objects, and when you do, you get this warning saying, hey, please realize that organizational units serve the purpose of delegation of control, which we're going to look at in a moment here, and group policy application. And when you move an object from one to another, you may change how things are working. Okay, so that's what that warning is all about. I'll say, yep, I know what I'm doing. And now we find a couple users in the New York office. But the reality is that you probably don't want to just create one OU called New York and then just put everything involved into that New York container. Now let me move something else just real quick here. We're going to take our computers, and I'll take my Windows 8 client and move it over into New York also. Okay, we're going to say that that's also part of the New York office. This doesn't make a lot of sense. What would make more sense is if I was to create another OU inside of New York. So we'll go to New OU. And we're going to create NY users. And I'm going to create another OU, NY computers. And then from there, we could take Jane Doe and John Smith and move them into the NY users container, and the Windows 8 client and move it into the New York computers container. That might be a better structure. And I say might because there is no one correct answer to this. Okay, you have to decide what you want to do, how you want to have this set up. We might, in the New York office, we might go ahead and create organization units that then say NY sales and an OU for NY accounting. Just to give an example, right? And we might continue with more departments in the New York office. And we could then, inside the departmental OU, we might create the OU that says NY sales users. New OU, NY sales computers. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to build this all out. And as you can see, it's getting a little messy because it doesn't really make sense to have NY users and computers when you have the department and then sales users and computers inside of there. I'm just kind of trying to show you there's multiple different ways that you can choose to set up your OU structure. And when determining what this structure is going to look like, and you do want to plan this out before doing it, you need to take into consideration three main things. And this is in no particular order. Number one, how are your group policy objects going to be applied? And I know we haven't talked about group policy up to this point in the course, but we will talk about it later. When those group policy objects are applied, figure out how that's going to work. Second is any delegation of control, which we're going to look at in just a moment. And third, well, what looks nice, right? Just being organized, easy to find things. When I say those three things are in no particular order, by default, they're in no particular order. But you should actually be prioritizing the order as far as, what's most important to you. Is group policy application most important? Is delegation most important? Or is organization most important? And that's how you determine the structure that you're going to use. Now, you remember, we talked about that protect from accidental deletion checkbox. Well, here, let's take this NY accounting organization unit, and let's say we don't need this anymore. If I were to right-click and select delete, it says, are you sure you want to delete this OU? Yep, I'm sure I do. Uh-oh, I get an error. You do not have sufficient privileges to delete this OU, or, see, and this is the big or here, right? Because it could be that I just don't have permissions to do this. Or the other half is it said it could be protected from accidental deletion. And in this case, we happen to know that that's exactly what it is, right? We know I have permission because I'm the all-powerful administrator right now. And we also know that that box was checked for accidental deletion. So what do we do about it? Well, the first thing is I want to go into the properties to show you that what I'm looking for is not here. Okay, I have my general tab, nothing about accidental deletion, manage by, nothing about accidental deletion, and com plus, nothing there either. The reason I don't see it is because this is an example where you need to come up to the view menu and go to your advanced features. Now we've seen this before in other lessons where the advanced features will now show us a number of additional containers, but also if I go ahead and expand this out, here I have my New York accounting. If I go to the properties now, I have additional tabs. And it's on the object tab that you find that checkbox for protect object from accidental deletion. I have to clear that box, click OK. Now I can go ahead and delete the object. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes. And it's gone. So that's why I say if you leave that box checked when you first create the organizational unit, you're really not going to accidentally delete it. You have to go out of your way to, even if you're viewing advanced features, which you shouldn't be by default, and I'm going to actually uncheck that box and stop looking at advanced features. But even if you are looking at them by default, you're still going to have to go into the properties of the container and uncheck that box before deleting the object, so you're not going to do it accidentally. And this was an old problem. An old problem that we had was I'd just take this New York container and I would delete it thinking it was something else, and I'd say, yeah, and it would delete. And then everything inside of it would be gone, including that computer account and those user accounts. So unlike a group where you can delete the group, but it doesn't delete the users that are members of the group, if you delete a container, it will delete the objects that are inside of it. Now you'll get a warning. There's actually an extra warning box, and I'll show this to you. Let's jump back and put our advanced features back on. Go to the properties of New York. Go to the object tab and not protect it from deletion. When I go to delete this, and I say, yes, I want to do it, there's one more warning, meaning because there are objects inside, it's going to say, hey, are you sure? Because, there's stuff in here you're going to be getting rid of. Now, obviously, I don't want to do this, so I'm going to click no. I don't want to lose all of those objects that are inside, but I just wanted to show you that there is an extra layer of protection there. Now, as long as we have the advanced features still enabled, I want to show you that with that feature enabled, when you go into the property sheet of any object within the Active Directory infrastructure, one of the extra tabs that shows up is a security tab. And in this security tab, you'll see that it looks a whole lot like file and folder permissions. Right? We've seen this throughout the operating system, whether it be NTFS permissions, shared folder permissions, there's all sorts of different permissions. Well, we also have Active Directory permissions, where we have the different users and groups, and then the level of permission that they have. And I will tell you that this can get quite advanced, right? So I'm going to actually click on advanced as long as I'm going to say the word. And I want to show you that on any particular object, if I were to highlight it and go into edit, you will see there's a lot of checkboxes available. Okay, so this can get a little bit crazy. So let's cancel out of here. Let's cancel all the way out. And I want to show you that what we can do is use something called the Delegation of Control Wizard to help us with assigning specific privileges. Because it's not that uncommon to have people out in certain areas of the company that you may want to have a certain level of administrative privilege. And these people don't even have to be a member of the IT group. All right? I'm going to give you an example here. If we were to go into, well, just for the sake of making this example make sense, I'm going to take my New York users, Jane Doe and John Smith, and I'm going to move them into NY sales users. Okay, so we're going to use the example here that this is the sales department in the New York office, and here are the users in that department. And we're going to say that John is not just a user in this department, but he's actually the supervisor of the department. And we want to let John have the ability to reset passwords for the other members of his department. And this is not a bad idea, by the way. Just on a separate side note, that scenario right there, that's actually a very sensible one. I implemented that in different companies and proven that it makes a lot more sense from a security standpoint than to have the help desk team reset passwords, especially if you have a large organization. Because when users forget their password, they call in the help desk. It's now up to the help desk personnel to validate that the person calling in is who they claim to be and not somebody else who's trying to social engineer their way into the network. And in a large organization, it can be very difficult for a help desk member to know everybody in the company. Whereas if we narrow it down to individual departments, there's a really good chance that John Smith is familiar with the people who work directly in his own department. And if they have to walk over to his desk and say, hey, John, I forgot my password, well, John's going to look at him and say, all right, I know who this is. Let's go ahead and reset it for him. Great. Now there's the story. Now let's see how to do it. If I right-click on the NY Sales Users container, there is a selection here right at the top that says Delegate Control. This will take me into, let me move this down a little bit, into the Delegation of Control wizard. Click Next. Here it says select one or more users or groups to whom you want to delegate control. So this is, who do you want to give permission to? Well, we said we want to give it to John Smith, so I'll click on Add. I'll type in John, see what it finds. It finds John Smith. That's the only John I have in my network right now. Click OK. Now, typically, you'd probably be using groups. You want to assign permissions to groups, not individual users. But in this instance, we're going to go ahead and say a user, just for the example. I'll click Next. Now, what is it that you want to let John do? Well, we want to let John reset user passwords and force password change at next logon. Next, and finish. And that's it. Now, if I look at the properties of this container, and I go to the Security tab and go to Advanced, you'll see here that John Smith can reset passwords. And if I click on Edit, you'll see that it found that checkbox. Rather than me having to look for it, and yes, I know it's right in the top here. It's in this first section. But, what if it wasn't? What if it was buried somewhere way down here? It found it for me. So is there any rule that says you must use the Delegation of Control wizard as opposed to just manually going into the Security tab? No, not at all. It's just there to maybe make your life easier if you happen to, find that wizard to be easier than going through and checking boxes manually. Now, what I want to do here is let's stop looking at advanced features, okay, because we're kind of done with that, and I don't want to have that stuff. Again, my recommendation is do not leave those advanced features checked. Check the box when you need to use them. So that's pretty much what you do with organizational units. And so that brings us to the end of this lesson, where we've seen that with the use of organizational units, we no longer have to live in that world of big, long alphabetical lists. We can now take things and group them together and put them into these various containers and, be organized. But what we've also seen is that these organizational units can help with the delegation of administrative control, so controlling who has what level of power within Active Directory domain services. And although we didn't really see anything, I talked about it a little bit, and I encourage you to keep this in mind when you go and watch the group policy lessons, that these organizational units come in real handy when it comes to the application of those group policy objects. So that's it for working with organizational units, and I'll see you in the next lesson.